Hey, this is Miss Mary, and we're going to be looking at some of the fundamental ideas within this first unit of what is anthropology. What is this discipline that we're going to be studying? So in the presentation today, these are going to be the objectives, what we're going to hope to understand by the end, and also the vocabulary that we hope that you can explain or summarize as well. So the big objectives from this short presentation today is, first off, can you describe the history of anthropology? How did it develop? Where does it come from? Also, can you identify the individuals that helped in its development, helped in the field of anthropology, in their contributions, theories, foundings, that sort of thing? And then finally, can you explain the relationship of different events throughout history and how they led to the development of the discipline of anthropology, specifically the Enlightenment of the 17th century and Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th century? And then the big vocabulary today. First, what is anthropology? What is the definition of this discipline that we're studying? What's ethnocentrism, evolution, and then finally participant observation. First off, what is anthropology? What is this thing that we're studying? Well, specifically, it is the study of human societies, but most specifically, and this is what really separates anthropology from things like sociology. Specifically, it is the study of that culture of a society. What do they have? How do they interact with each other? What are their material objects? What are the symbols that they use with each other? What do they eat? Why do they eat that? And how did that culture develop? This is really what separates anthropology from the other social sciences, is that it really focuses on that culture. And it's something that's developing around the time of most other social sciences that we'll be looking at later on in this unit, which is the late 19th century, primarily coming out of Europe, places like Germany, as well as England and France. And it's really coming during this time because at that point we had had increasing globalization for the last several hundred years. And so the more that we started to interact with others, the more we wanted to understand those other cultures that were very different from us over in Europe. And so some of those events that led to this increased interaction and globalization with the other cultures, it really kicks off in the 1400s during the 15th century. This is the age of exploration. Starting in the mid-1400s, we started to sail out from Europe and started to go down first the coastlines of Africa in order to try to find a better route into Asia, but then eventually across the ocean we encountered the Americas. So with this, we started to have increased cultural diffusion. So we started to have European culture that started to move to other places around the world, as well as the material and non-material objects of those other cultures coming over to Europe. And so this increased interaction started to have people question, why are these cultures different? Why are we different than these people? And what we also saw within Europe is the development of something called ethnocentrism. It was believed at that time that Europe was so much more developed than everybody else. Of course, this is just a relative way of viewing it. It's a European way of viewing it. And so as they started to interact with more and more cultures around the world, Europeans started to believe that they were superior. And there must be some sort of an innate explanation for why. And they wanted to understand, what is it that makes us so developed and these people not developed? And this really is kind of what anthropology is looking at. Not so much this idea that we are ethnocentric and we want to explain why are we so good and they're not quite as good, but instead we are trying to figure out what makes our culture and what makes their culture different. This is really starting to then build up in the 17th century with the Enlightenment movement. Enlightenment is all about the search for reason and truth, and why does something happen? There must be an explanation within nature. It can't just be God decided that we are superior. There must be some explanation for it. And so we're trying to find the fundamental root causes for differences and why culture develops different ways. And then a couple hundred years later, we had something called the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution was the establishment of factories and production of goods. And this caused huge changes within European society. And some of the big changes that occurred is people moved from farms into cities. People started to work not on farms, but in factories. Families started to be split up. Instead of working all together on the farm, Mom went to one factory, dad went to another, and the kids went to a factory and then eventually to school. So all these rapid changes that are occurring over the course of these 4 centuries are eventually leading to the development of anthropology. Along with it, we started to also have other ideas be created during the 19th century that also led to this discipline of anthropology. Specifically, the ideas of Charles Darwin had quite a bit of an effect. Charles Darwin, you might have heard of Darwinism, he's most closely associated with the theory of evolution. This is the idea that we develop and change in order to survive the elements within our environment. We physically adapt, we culturally adapt in order to make sure that we can continue on. And if we don't adapt, well, we're going to end up dying off. And so those that have existed through today, their ancestors were the ones that made the good choices to adapt, or their bodies are the ones that adapted. And really, anthropology started to then wonder about this. So how have we adapted? What are the physical changes that we've gone through? Something that you're going to see in one of the next lesson plans is that we're going to look at the physical anthropology. Physical anthropologists care about what are the physical adaptations that humans have made in order to adapt to their environment, and how did that change their culture. But also anthropologists then want to look at the evolution of culture. Why do we make certain choices to act a certain way? Was it in order to survive our elements and survive our environment? And so evolution then also is having an influence in the development of this field. Now, anthropology as an actual science, and we do call it a science, it's a social science, it's coming out of this same time as the Charles Darwin evolution theory, around the late 19th century. And it's officially being established by the father of anthropology. His name is Franz Boas, and he's developing the first department of anthropology at a university, at Columbia University. Before this time, anthropology was really just mixed in with the other social sciences, specifically history. Now, history is more about looking at the past. Anthropology, according to Boa, was more about observing what's going on with the cultures today and understanding why are the cultures like that. Why are the cultures today so different and diverse? And he was really rejecting some of the ideas coming out during this time about biological determinism. Something about our genetics just make us different. Our genetics make certain cultures more advanced than other cultures. And he thoroughly rejected this idea. And this is really what anthropology is. So if it's not biological determinism, then why are cultures different? And he really wanted to understand the environmental pressures that led people and cultures to be a certain way. After him, in the 1920s, we had Malinowski. Malinowski picked up from Boas, and he decided that we need to actually go into the field and observe in order to better understand the different cultures and what motivated them and why they changed and adapted. And he developed a research technique called participant observation. So this is when the researcher, the anthropologist, would actually go into a culture and take an active role in the culture so that they can try to better understand it. So this is when they might go into, at least with Malinowski, he was going to Southeast Asia, Papua New Guinea, and instead of just sitting back and recording what he saw, he would actually become a part of the culture to try to better understand it. He would write down his findings in something called an ethnography, which is a written record of what he experienced while he was participating in that new culture. Alright, so this is the first lesson plan in Unit 1. You can watch this as many times as you want in order to review the terms and information, and please let me know if you have any questions.